Thank you. Well, welcome to this meeting of the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations Committee. I'm Mike Lord and we're doing this meeting by Zoom. There have been no public forum requests, so at this stage we have no public forum. And we do have an apology from Councillor Doug Hall. My deputy is unable to be here today. Is there any other apologies? Do I have a seconder for that apology? I'm happy to move it. Thank you, Councillor Walker. Can everyone show their hands if they're willing to accept that apology? Thank you. Anyone against? No, that's fine. I'd like to confirm the agenda as delivered. There's no changes to the agenda, so I'm happy to move that from the chair. Have I got a seconder? Councillor Geary, thank you. All in favour, raise their hands. Thank you. I'd just like to remind you of your declarations of interest, and does anyone have any changes to the declarations of interest that they'd like to declare? I can see no nodding heads or no vigorously waving, so I will just move that we note and I'll confirm and amend the proposed management plan for elected members. I'm happy to move that if I've got a seconder. Councillor Staines, thank you. Okay, if everyone likes to agree with that, please raise their hands. Those in favour, thank you. Anyone against? No, that's carried. I'd like to also move that we confirm the minutes of the previous Finance Committee meeting held on the 3rd of November 2021. Councillor Walker's wanting to move that and Councillor Houlihan is willing to second it. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor? No, he's happy. Any speakers? In that case, I'll move the motion. All those in favour, raise their hand. Anyone that's against? Thank you. Now we come to our Part A reports, and the first Part A report is the Forward Work Programme. Does anyone like to speak to that report, or anyone like to have any questions of that report? Oh, sorry, hands raised. Councillor Vandervist.
Thank you, Mike. Just wondering when we can expect the annual reports for DCHL and for Dunedin Railways.
So I'll speak to that, Councillor. So at this stage, my understanding is that the Dunedin City Holdings audit is to be completed this month. So we should have those by the end of February. So there's been a delay in the audit of the annual report for Dunedin City Holdings.
Right. Okay. And that delay is due to what?
Audit pressures, as well as just trying to get everything finalised for those accounts. So the numbers for the Dunedin City Holdings Group was cleared to allow consolidation into the DCC accounts. So this is just the finalisation of the statutory audit of their annual report.
And has the stadium valuation been finalised?
I believe so, yes, in terms of Dunedin Stadium property, yes.
And what did that come out at?
So that's valued in Dunedin Stadium property at cost, less accumulated depreciation.
Which was what?
Sorry, don't have that number to hand, Councillor.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a follow-up question from the annual reports of DCHL, and I've seen some of the annual reports online, but they haven't actually come to council. So I'm a bit concerned that we're not getting that information. Are we going to see them as a whole, as all at one time, or when are they coming to council?
So the intention at this stage, we were thinking of putting them as a whole, but given the time frame and the delay with the Dunedin City Holdings, we'll, in conjunction with the GSO office, potentially look at putting up all the subsidiary accounts to the meeting on the 22nd of February, and then we'll follow up with the DCHL and the ones that haven't been completed once they come through to us.
Thank you. My next question is just around with the Forward Work Programme. Some of it is like the letters of expectation, the draft statement of intent. Some come to council, like we've seen the SOIs and the letters of expectation come to council, but they're also sitting on this work plan. So I'm a little confused about which committee they're intended to come to. So
the primary committee is this committee, but obviously this committee doesn't meet as frequently as council, so there are on occasion. So the finance report, for example, between finance and council control committee meetings, we will stick a finance report up to council as a matter of course, so that we're keeping those reports coming to you as a group.
Okay, yeah, I was kind of meaning that the CCO ones, which I think are also on the council work plan from memory. So I'm just sort of getting confused about which they go to.
I'll clarify that with the GSOs, but in terms of the draft statement of intents, they will come to this committee, and that's scheduled to occur in March.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Would someone like to move that? Or Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question about the home of the work, any work that's being done. I would assume it would be here, but it's not in the forward work program. In respect to a relatively dated council resolution to incentivise or investigate incentivisation of the restoration, strengthening access issues in the CBD for accommodation, is that fallen off the work programs for everyone, or does it belong somewhere else?
Not sure, councillor, so we'll get the GSO's office to follow up on that and see where that request lies.
That's great.
I can jump in if I could jump in. The outstanding action items in the forward work program were done for this triennium because they're a new thing, and that was the starting point. We have started to retrospectively go back, but we haven't made a huge amount of progress. So I'll get them to look for that one in particular. And as time allows, our intention is to go back in an orderly way year on year to see if there's anything else outstanding.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Does that satisfy any? Now, if you don't mind lowering your hands once you've got no questions, then it saves me confusion. Well, I'm willing to move from the chair that we accept the forward work program. So I've got a seconder. Councillor Alder, thank you for that. Anyone want to speak to it? Okay, if that's the case, I'll put the motion. Please do it by raising your hand if you agree. Thank you. Anyone disagree? It's carried. Thank you. We're now going to move forward to item 7, which is the resolutions and the actions from the work plan. Only the one item on it. Any questions? Okay, I'm also willing to move from the chair that we note the open actions from the resolutions of the Finance and Council controlled meetings. Councillor Stones, thank you for your second. Anyone wish to speak to it? If that's the case, I'll put the motion. All in favour, raise your hand. Against? It's carried. Thank you. Item 8, the Waipori Fund. Mr. Davey, would you come and join us, please? Would you like to take the report as read, or would you like to say anything about the conditions of it, or how would you like to take it, or just questions?
I'll make a couple of quick comments. It was a pleasing quarter for the fund, up in value 1.5% compared to the benchmark return of 0.7, and a gain of 1.5 million for the quarter. So it was a very good quarter for the fund. There's been a little bit of weakness in January, which is probably a little bit of a corrective pullback in the market since the end of last year.
Thank you. Any questions? None at all. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thanks for the report, as ever, and the comments there. Just one question, just around, obviously, markets like nothing more than a bit of surety and certainty. Presumably, the announcement from the government related to the easing of the border restrictions can do nothing but help, I imagine. Would you think?
Yes, that would tend to be positive for markets, and reducing any restrictions around COVID would be positive for markets. But yeah, it remains to see what's going to happen. But the fund's positioned as a long-term investor and well diversified, so should be able to withstand market volatility going forward.
Yep, thank you, and happy to move, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? No, we're going to move it. We've got a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Vandervis. Would you like to speak to that now, Councillor Walker?
Yeah, just very briefly, and I think it's really encouraging to hear the comments there, Mr. Davey, because we've always been assured, and I think certainly my glancing through the holdings of the portfolio a while back gave me a lot of confidence that we are, as we are always reminded, positioned for the long term. So I'm just really encouraged that we do have a portfolio that is not reactive to short-term trends and outlooks, but is there for the long-term future and benefit of the city. And it's at times like this, early January, when we can take solace in the fact and confidence from such a diversified long-term portfolio. So thanks for the investments, the ongoing work. Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
I just want to support that and say that we're trading above the benchmark significantly, and that indicates that the people looking after this fund are doing a great job. So great result, and gives surety that this fund is in good hands and in good shape. So thanks to all concerned.
Thank you. Is there any other speakers? No. Was your hand up? No, that's me. No, look, I'd just like to echo that too. It's a pleasing result when we're ahead of the benchmark. I guess benchmarks don't necessarily tell the whole story, but the quarterly amount that it's risen, and 3.3% for the year at this stage, I'm pretty happy with that. So if there's no other speakers, I'll put the motion. All those that are willing to note the report, raise a hand. Thank you. Is there anyone against? Okay, that's the motion carried. Now, thank you, Mr. Davey.
Thanks very much.
Now, Gavin, item 9, the financial report to the end of December. Would you like to piece that with any comments, or
Just maybe if we refer councillors to page 37, which just has the summary financial information. So again, if we look at the 3 graphs, the operating surplus year to date, excluding Waipori, is behind the budget. That relates to that the money that's due to come in for the Osgoode pool. In terms of operating cash flow, very positive year to date. Some of it is to do with stimulus money that we're getting from the government in relation to Three Waters, and also the code money that we get for economic development. And then just looking at CapEx, so CapEx is tracking ahead of the previous year and just below budget, but fairly close. It was a good catch up in the month. And as you'll note in the CapEx report, it talks about running about 97.4% of the year-to-date budget. So I have to take any questions on the detail.
we got any questions? Councillor Vandervis, I saw your hand first.
Just wondering if we could get a bit more information on the stimulus money for Three Waters. Is that the assumption that the government is taking it and they're paying us for it already?
This is as part of the reform. There has been some stimulus money that's come through over the last 12 to 18 months.
So that's to help us pay for the improvements that we've been doing in terms of water quality.
Correct. It's allocated to very specific projects, but yes, it is.
Okay, thank you for that. On page 38, I noticed that other operating revenue is down 1.5 million. Can you tell me what the other operating revenue is and why it's down 1.5 million?
So if I refer you, we refer councillors to page 44, we talk about the revenue. So some of it is the impact of the COVID lockdown earlier in the year, particularly in the aquatic services and parking areas. Also, we've noted the lower volumes coming into the landfill. And then that's partially offset by some favourable income lines in building services, particularly with the activity in that area. And then there was some funding that was received into transport to do with the Marlow Park upgrade.
Thank you. So how much of it was the reduction in landfill income?
712,000.
Thanking you. Going on to page 40, cash flow from investing activities. Just wondering what the investment is that we're talking about 3,299,000, about halfway down the page.
So yep, so that's the movements in the Waipori fund. So that's money as it shifts around the Waipori fund. So it's to do with the movements in the Waipori fund.
So it was budgeted at 2.5 million. But
so the 2.5 million is the DCHL equity injection that we do once a year. So that's normally done in June. So the
what's that equity injection for? What's the purpose of that? Is that a subsidy of the stadium?
That's the equity injection that's been agreed in the 10-year plan for that company.
Equity injection being a subsidy for the stadium?
It's the equity injection that's been agreed in the 10-year plan.
You've told me that twice now. Can you please answer my question?
It's the equity injection that's been agreed in the 10-year plan to provide funding to the stadium and the stadium operating company.
Right. So it is a subsidy for the stadium.
Subsidy is a term that you've used, Councillor. It's not a term that I choose to use.
Okay. And why is that increased? Full year budget was for 2.5 million. 6 months seems to already be 3.3 million. Why the increase and why so early in the year?
So the 3.3 million is the money in the Waipori fund, which at the start of the year would have been in the bank account, and it's now being used to reinvest into equity investments within that portfolio. So that's the Waipori fund movement. It's got nothing to do with the DCHL shareholder equity injection.
Right. Okay. So this equity injection is the same that we had last year?
Correct, Councillor.
And is it happening at the same rate through the year as last year?
It's a once a year equity injection that we do in June.
Right.
So the 3.3 is the Waipori fund. So we, at the start of the year, we have Waipori fund will have money in the bank, and then they take that money and reinvest it into equities.
Right. Okay. Hard to say from these tables, but thank you very much for explaining that. Just wondering, in terms of DCHL not having their annual report, wondering if they produce a 5 or 10 year forecast, and if they do, are we able to see it?
So they will do it as part of their statement of intent. They will do a 3-year forecast, which will come through to council.
It'll be a 3-year only. Do they do a longer forecast themselves?
Not a question I can answer here, Councillor.
Thank you. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Elder.
I have some questions just related to the graph on year-to-date capital expenditure, and it's pleasing to see that we're getting a lot of work done around the city. And I was just wondering if you could comment on a couple of things that might have improved this outcome, which is great to see. Do you believe having procurement officers enables us to get more work done and plan ahead for more work to be done in a more sort of comprehensive way?
Certainly, I would think putting in place good long-term contracts with contractors allows us to deliver work in a more efficient manner, yes.
And that kind of was my second question is, do you believe our securing a couple of years ago some long-term contracts with providers, infrastructure providers, has increased our capacity alongside procurement officers working?
So yeah, that's evident in the Three Waters area.
Yeah.
Certainly, yeah. But there will always be capacity issues in the market, you know, with the current situation in terms of supply chains, and that capacity could change over time. But certainly when you look at Three Waters, they're running $8 million ahead of budget, and majority of it is in the renewal space, says that those long-term contracts are starting to have a benefit.
So it's delivering renewals for the city in a more efficient and faster manner.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Raddick.
Yes, Councillor Vandeviss's question has made me a little bit confused now. So I'm wondering, Mr. Logie, if you could explain perhaps a little bit more widely a couple of things. So I'm given then to understand, based on your answer, that 5408 in the increase in investments is then a DCHL shareholder equity injection. What's the relationship between well, last year 5408, the full year budget is 2.5, and our year-to-date budget actual is 3.3. What is the difference between those three figures, please? I mean, not in monetary terms, but in terms of where that money is coming from and going to, please.
Right, so just so we're clear, the 3.3 or 3299
Yep.
and the 5.408 is movements within the Waipori Fund.
Mhm.
So it's investments being made by the Waipori Fund. The 2.5, which we budget, so we don't generally budget for those movements because we don't know what they're going to be.
Yeah.
The 2.5 is something we do budget for, and that is the equity injection that we make once a year into DCHL.
Okay, so their movements in the Waipori Fund, that is the increase in value of the.
No, that's where we've gone. This is a cash flow, so it's actually that we've gone out and purchased new equities or new investments.
Right, and presumably from the profitability of other investments.
Yeah,
or
well, from
buyers doing or not. Yeah.
yeah, from the dividend income that we receive, from the interest income we receive, we can then reinvest some of that money, which grows the portfolio.
Sure. So back up a few, the third from the top line, we've got interest received, budget 3, well, last year was 3.6, and year to date so far is 3.6, and the budget year to date is 3.6. So this is this the interest that we've received from our term loan to DCHL?
Plus the interest that's received by the Waipori Fund.
On their various investments.
Yeah, because remember that the council owns the Waipori Fund, so it's part of our operating budgets.
Yes, but we're getting some from our loan. We're getting an interest return on our loan to DCHL plus some money from the Waipori Fund.
Correct, Councillor.
Interest payments. Great. Just trying to get that straight. So why then is it this DCHL shareholder equity injection? Where is that money going to? Is that going from the council back to DCHL?
Correct.
Sorry?
Yes, Councillor.
Yeah. So why are we doing that? If they're paying us, DCHL is paying us net, well, not dividend, but interest payments. So that interest payments on the loan and money that's coming to the DCC, why do they need this equity injection? Is the equity in DCHL falling so that we need to top that up by this injection, or what?
So as I mentioned when Councillor Vandervis asked his question, the 2.5 million is then allows DCHL to provide some funding to Dunedin Stadium Property and some funding to Dunedin Venues Management Limited to help run the stadium.
Right, and that's called an equity injection. How does that change? If we're 100% owner, how does that increase our equity?
So it's paid as an equity injection. That is the method by which council has agreed to provide that funding to DCHL.
Yes, but we've already, why is it called an equity injection when we already have got? I mean, it's not increasing the value of the company, is it?
It increases our shareholding, our dollar value shareholding in that company, yes.
Although the same, we're 100% shareholder.
Yeah, but we effectively buy more shares. It's an equity injection. It's a method by which we've agreed to provide funding.
Right. I mean, sorry, it doesn't. I find that I struggle to understand that when we're 100% owner, and yet we're issued with more shares. How can we be more than 100% owner if we own the whole thing?
Because the shareholding goes up in the company. We're still 100% shareholding. We're just providing them a funding source.
Yes, but it has the value of the company, as a result of this injection of 2.5 million, has the value of DCHL gone up any?
Well, they get 2.5 million, but then they pay it out again. So the value of the parent company, no, but the value of the group is obviously changing as the results of those companies increase. Like, so City Forest, for example.
Yeah, but it's coming from different sources. I mean, the chances are that given that there's elements of DCHL that are going backwards in the current environment, that'll be a negative equity injection. I mean, well, it's not. It's forestalling a drop in equity. Would that be right?
So the value that we record DCHL in our books is the value that we've acquired the shares for. It's not that we don't record the value of DCHL or the DCHL group at market value in our books. It's recorded at cost. All we have to do is to make sure that the cost of that investment is less than the market value of those companies, which it is.
Right. So is there a taxation advantage by calling that an equity injection? Or is it
no,
is the advantage of that?
It's just the methodology by which the funding is provided.
Yes, but
as opposed to an operating grant.
Yes. So what is the advantage of calling it one rather than the other? Pardon my ignorance.
It's from an accounting point of view, it means we record it as an increase in the asset value rather than an operating expense. That's the methodology by which council has agreed to provide that funding.
If it was an operating expense, it would be tax deductible, would it not? If we're in a
we're not a taxable entity, councillor.
Right. Okay, that's fine. I'm still somewhat mystified as to why that we use that mechanism as opposed to another. However, that's fine. That'll do for now. Thank you.
It's agreed. Yeah, that was the way we agreed to do it in the long-term plan. So that's just what we've budgeted to do. So you perhaps need to take closer notice when we do our budgets.
Yeah, but that doesn't explain why we have used that method. That's what I'm confused about.
Probably can't make it any easier. Councillor Geary, you had your hand up and you've now lowered it. Did you have a question?
I did have a question. I was giving up on time, really. So this was in the detail of the report on page 48. And I was interested to know, this is around the unfavourable with property of 2.218 million. It was mainly due to rent relief provided to some commercial tenants. I was interested to know what the number of tenants were, and I'm not sure, Mr. Logie, whether you'd have that at hand or not, but it was support we were giving commercial tenants in the city. Just wondered how many.
So no, I wouldn't know the number, councillor. However, in the forward work program, we will present a report of some of that funding that we've provided to the community over the last 2 or 3 years. Yeah. Sure. So we can talk about it at that point.
Thank you for that. And another detail I was interested to hear a bit more about was up in the 3 water section around the program to replace water Toby taps and water meters. How extensive is that work? Could you remind me? Do you happen to know that off the top of your head?
And not a level of detail that I would know, councillor. So maybe that's a question that could go to ISCOM on next week.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It is my belief that just virtually every supplier has a Toby, and some commercial clients have got meters, but not all general public aren't metered. Yeah. Any other questions? I'm willing to move the report. Is there any seconder? Thank you, Councillor Staines. No, look, I'll just briefly speak to this. Look, the numbers are numbers, and at this stage, it looks like we're pretty much tracking on track for what we've done. It is interesting when you look at the CapEx, the ability to spend is increasing. We are doing bigger numbers on a more regular basis, and some of the people that have been around council a bit longer will remember there were days when we used to think $20 million was a lot of capital expenditure. And at that time, probably we weren't spending enough to just keep the assets in good order. But now we are getting to a stage in the budgeted figure where we're 97% of the budget. which if you look at the graph is not 90% of the year's spend, but it just shows that our budget is tracking well to what we're able to spend. So no, with the Waipori result as well, I'm reasonably happy. Is there any other speakers? Okay, if that's the case, I'll put the motion. All those raise their hand. Anyone against? I will say that's carried. I'd also just like to now turn to item 10, which is items of notification for consideration by the chair. Is there anything anyone would like to bring up? Okay, well, if that's the case, I will declare the meeting. Oh, sorry, Councillor Vandervis.
Wondering, given the various ways that we subsidise the stadium, the much lower rates that we charge them, this 2.55 million that we sling under the radar, whether we can have just a very brief page of all the other ways that we end up subsidising or paying
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
Thank you. Nostalgic. I object to the characterisation of the capital injection to the companies as being slung under the radar. It's done reasonably openly and transparently as we sign off on our 10-year plan, and I don't think that is a fair way of characterising that funding mechanism.
I apologise for the way I characterised it and withdraw. My question is it possible to have a list of all the different ways that we end up sending money to the stadium in whatever manner, whether it's a much lower special rates, whether it's the 2.55 million we've just been discussing, and whether it's for other funds for promoting events or whatever. Could we have just a brief list, less than a page, I think, to actually tabulate all the different ways that we end up sending money to the stadium?
Yep, no, look, that's no problem, we can do that. Any other notification? No, okay, well, I'll close the meeting at 1:33, and if you just give me time to withdraw to another room and Councillor Staines to come in here, how about we restart the meeting in 5 minutes, Councillor Staines? I'm getting the nod, okay, thank you.
Welcome everyone to this meeting of the Economic Development Standing Committee. Apologies, we have an apology from Councillor Doug Hall. I'm happy to move that that apology be accepted. Seconded, Councillor Walker. All in favour? That's agreed. Confirmation of the agenda. I'll move that we confirm the agenda without addition or alteration. Seconded, Councillor Wiley. All in favour? Against? That is carried. Declarations of interest. I assume there has been no changes since our previous meeting. So in that case, I will move that we note the elected members' interest register and confirm the proposed management plan. Seconded, Councillor Elder. All in favour? Against? That is carried. Confirmation of minutes. I'll move that the committee confirms the minutes of the Economic Development Committee meeting held on the 1st of November 2021 as a correct record. Seconded, Councillor Elder. Any discussion? If not, I'll put it. All in favour? Against? That is carried. That brings us to item 6, the Economic Development Committee Forward Work Programme. Mr. Christie, do you have anything to say on this?
Just happy to take any questions if there are any.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Elder?
I note that the report on Study Dunedin is due in April, but I was wondering if later in the meeting we could talk about that in relation to the opening of the borders and what kind of things we might be doing because the second semester is open to international students. Would that be okay?
Look, we were intending to report more fully in April and we'll look to do so, Councillor. If it's agreeable by the chair, we're happy to take a little bit of direction and answer any questions around that particular portfolio in this meeting.
Oh, thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to check in with you, Mr. Christie, around the Dunedin destination plan. I note there's potentially, or there are some delays and potentially, of course, maybe more with when Omicron arrives. But I'm assuming that the reasons for the delays are beyond our control. Would that be a fair characterisation of them? Because there is a third party doing the work. Is that correct?
That is correct. Our consultants are spread over New Zealand and Australia, and it has been very difficult for them, obviously, to get face-to-face time with some of the engagement that they're wanting to undertake with local operators in particular and other interest groups. That has progressed, but not as quickly as we would like in terms of some of the work. We're anticipating that we will have a draft report within the next couple of months, but that again is going to be subject to the consultants being able to do the work required to get that document completed. We then have further work to do on the destination plan, just around ensuring that what the destination plan is covering is going to meet the needs of our local stakeholders and operators. So there's still quite a bit of work to be done. We're hopeful that that can be done in the next coming months, hopefully without too much interruption from COVID.
Yeah, that was my next question. So I noticed somewhere a comment about some of the stakeholders like to do in person, as we all do. Is that an obstacle to, when Omicron arrives, is that going to be an obstacle to tuning in with our local stakeholders?
It's less of an obstacle than it has been with other lockdowns, in particular the Auckland lockdown, where one of the consultants has been unable to travel out of Auckland, and of course our Australian consultant that also can't come from Australia. So yeah, we think it will be a little bit easier from this point, but not quite sure yet until we know the detail of what that engagement might look like from those consultants.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Just a follow-up from that. I think in the last EDC and at the end of the year, we were told that March and April was sort of there for the product development work and for the destination plan. And obviously we have some decisions to make about the railway. So I was just wondering if you actually have more of a definite time frame for in the next few months. I think somewhere else it sort of says July, but is April still foreseeable?
It is for the draft, councillor, but then we still have further engagement to do. So until we're comfortable that the community engagement is at the level that will give us a document that we believe will be in the best interests of the sector and our community, we'll continue to have that dialogue. So somewhat dependent on people's level of acceptance that we've got the work right and that the consultants have done their job to the best of their ability to produce a document that's workable for the tourism sector in particular. The product development review, I've talked to the consultants that are working on that piece of work. They've assured me that we will have a draft report by the end of March. We will bring that back to council at the first available opportunity once we've seen that report and can make it available to you.
Thank you. My other question was just around where it has area of work grow Dunedin partnership, and I'm just wondering if this is incorrect. It says an update report will be presented to the May 2022 committee meeting previously scheduled for November 2021, but we had a report in November 2021. So does that mean that we will be having another report in May? Is that correct?
That's correct. We undertook to give 6 monthly updates to all of the partners of Grow Dunedin Partners, and there is a substantial report that will come annually, as well as the work program that we would look to bring back to council. The 6 monthly update will be a lighter report, and it will give you the opportunity to see how we've all been tracking against those various projects.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor van der Vis, you had your hand up, but it went back down again. I assume you have not got a question. All right, in that case, there are no more questions, so I'll move that the committee notes the Economic Development Committee Forward Work Programme. Seconded, Councillor Gary. All in favour? Against? That is carried. Item 7, Economic Development Activity Report for the period 1 July to 31 December 21. Mr. Christie, have you got any comments to make?
Happy to take questions from councillors.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question on page 28, the level of service satisfaction with economic development, and there's obviously that's a perception question, and I just wonder what's being done to address the public perception of people that are satisfied with the council support for economic development.
I'll take that one. Look, we're continuing our work program. I think, in all honesty, a lot of the feedback from your community during hard times when businesses are struggling and facing, not knowing what's happening with various lockdown levels, that's certainly impacted on them wanting some leadership and direction from council around, what potentially could be impacting on their business longer term. I think that will turn around. We see business confidence surveys that do match their environment quite closely. So I suspect that as we come through a rebuilding post-COVID, those statistics will improve dramatically. In the interim, we're trying to bring forward any of the initiatives that we have either led by government or working in with local government and local organisations such as Business South, making sure that we're providing every opportunity to our local businesses to sustain and grow their businesses in what is a really difficult time. We're doing everything we can through our own internal work programs to ensure that we are assisting with startups, getting code grant money out, providing startup clinics,
whatever might be required to ensure that we are seen by our community to be responsive to the needs of economic development. And I guess that perception will be, obviously something that is mirroring how people are feeling, and hopefully we will see those numbers start to address in coming months.
Thank you. I've got two more questions. My next one is just around the business clinics. And are there any statistics and satisfaction surveys done with the clients? Obviously, they come into the business clinics and they're, I was going to say, concierge into different places. But is there any statistics or follow-up kept on who actually, or how many businesses start from that?
Yeah, we're looking at doing some more qualitative research into some of the areas of activity for Enterprise Dunedin, and this is definitely one that we would like to be able to do some longitudinal research into to see what effect our team have had around working with those businesses, whether they've actually gone on to start up and continue to grow their business. So that does just require us to put a little bit of process around that, councillor, and we're looking at doing that across a range of different measures, which will obviously feed in ultimately to our levels of service.
Yeah, I guess that, this report is about levels of service, which is pretty scant and I guess got a lot of opinion in it. But I just wonder, this is sort of more about the outputs, not the outcomes. And I also wonder about the reporting on the status of 13 projects from the EDS. You've said that we're going to have 6 monthly updates on that, but I also wonder, in order to inform some of this, whether we can look at getting more of the reporting aligned to the actual strategy rather than just the levels of service.
Yeah, look, I understand there's a wider piece of work that council is undertaking around levels of service, so we'll ensure that we tie our reporting back to that as will be across council, councillor.
Yeah, I was meaning more about the strategic stuff. We've got 13 projects there and a whole lot of measurements. I'll talk about that a bit later, but just wondering what's happening with it. And I guess it was almost a question for the CEO is just to remind me, what is the timeline for the reviews of the levels of service?
So we're working on that. There are two bits there, so I'll do the levels of service one first, if I might. So we are looking to a workshop on levels of service and the roles to have something back to council in May. That will be a first cut of that. At the same time, we're also looking at, in these activity reports, they are iterative and the links to the strategies need to be included, but that work is still ongoing. At the same time, Ms. Wikara and her team are doing that broader strategic refresh, and that will be reported back in May also.
Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
I've got about 4 questions. The first being a good news story, and that is that the Royal Treatment, the Netflix series movie Royal Treatment, was really popular. In fact, it was #1 at one stage. And I was just wondering, under point 4 film inquiries, and I note that they've increased from 12, they're up 12 and permits up 3. I was just wondering if that had stirred any more interest in Dunedin as a filming destination, because the views, say, of Lanark Castle were amazing.
Anecdotally, we believe it has, councillor. The Royal Treatment, you're correct, has been #1 for 2 weeks in the and Netflix, and is still in the top 10, which we're obviously delighted about. In terms of the inquiries, I was speaking with Mr. Deaker just earlier. There's still a number of international inquiries that are coming through, especially over the last fortnight or so, and they have reflected an interest around the built heritage. So we haven't got necessarily a clear linear relationship, but we do believe that it's obviously the visibility that's been created through the Royal Treatment is showcasing the city as a film destination. There's also been some interesting write-ups in international publications, including The Guardian. So we're very pleased with that.
Correspondingly, do we monitor any hits on our destination sites and whether in fact there's been an increased interest in Dunedin as a destination through this.
We'd have to come back with those specific data on that, but we can certainly check that as well in relation to the launch of the rural treatment as well, see if there's any correlation.
And just relating to my question about Study Dunedin, point 7 is the Pathways project to do with creating videos of Dunedin as an international student destination. And I was just wondering, is there any more work being done, particularly as our borders open in term 2 for international students? I was just wanting some commentary around that, really.
Yes, there is. We actually had a meeting of the Study Dunedin Advisory Group this morning where brought in the polytechnic universities and secondary schools. And there is another workshop planned with that group in terms of how best to ready ourselves as a city and as a destination for international education over the coming months. There's some things within there that we believe we can move quickly on, which is just reaffirming, I suppose, our relationship with agents, and again through perhaps city marketing activities, just pushing out again the importance of international education to Dunedin itself as well. So it was positive to have that conversation through the city partners, and that'll touch on the future workshop that we'll be having as that group. We'll probably touch on some of the actions that we can specifically do as Enterprise Dunedin and more broadly with our education partners.
I think this is my last question. It's just related to everything opening up. So we can now take visitors from Auckland, which is a huge population, but also soon to be Australia. And I was just wondering, just anecdotally, how we're gearing up for marketing in that space, given the borders are opening to Auckland and to Australia initially.
Yeah, so we've been working for several months now, Councillor, on what opening of borders might look like for Dunedin, and working in conjunction with some of our national partners, likes of Tourism New Zealand. We've got a tender out in market shortly to look at our next campaign. That campaign will be directed at reopening of borders, both with Australia and internationally. We're expecting that the first lot of visitors we'll receive from Australia in particular will be visiting friends and family.
Yeah.
So we'll be targeting using digital channels, the things that we know that people are looking for in terms of activity, and working in with our local community and operators as to how they might benefit from some of these visitors returning. So yeah, look, it's still a wee way off. We are well through our planning, and we're prepared and looking forward to being able to welcome visitors back into the city across a number of different areas, Councillor. So I know there may even be some discussions in the not too distant future about the return of cruise. Again, we're ready, looking to put in place our cruise action plan for the return of cruise, along with our other marketing activities.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Councillor Gary.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Staines. A couple of questions. In the page 29, the second point under specific areas of work talks about startup canvas submissions. Can you enlighten me as to what that is, please?
Certainly. That is where the startup with the Startup Dunedin Trust and the staff of the Startup Dunedin Trust are actively working and preparing a document or a plan with a founder who's come through the distiller itself. So the inquiries, distinguishing the canvases from the inquiries are literally that. It could be phone calls, it could be emails, it could be a degree of engagement. The canvases effectively is where the staff at Startup Dunedin are actually actively working with the founders on planning.
Excellent, thank you. And in relation to point 3, code, do I recall that Wellington is now becoming a bit of a competitor in this space. Was it Wellington? Do I recall that correctly?
We are still the Centre of Digital Excellence for New Zealand, as we say quite proudly. So there is a lot of activity that is happening across New Zealand, including Christchurch and Wellington. But we are very proud of the achievements that we're going through, and it just behoves us to keep pushing out our identity as New Zealand Centre of Digital Excellence.
Excellent, thank you. That's good to hear. And finally, just a follow-up question around film. I heard this morning on the news that Power of the Dog has been nominated for the Oscars, and quite interestingly, people in the States are assuming that it's Montana that they're actually looking at, and then they find out it's New Zealand. They're very impressed. How long will that flow-on effect would you suggest would take to then flow on to inquiries for filming in New Zealand? Because it's no doubt going to have even more of an impact, I would have thought.
Yes, look, being Power of the Dog being nominated for 12 Oscars is fantastic news, and it's fantastic news for us as a region as well as a city. So we believe that those messages are filtering out. There was a brief discussion, we talked briefly around the royal treatment, and one thing I sort of failed to mention was that when the royal treatment was being filmed, there was actually 2 other significant productions actually happening within the region and associated with the city at the same time. So what the Power of the Dog, royal treatment, projects such as even One Lane Bridge or Under the Vines is demonstrating is that we do have the capacity, the expertise, the places to actually make quality productions within the city and within the region. And we believe more of that confidence, those messages will keep continuing to come out as well.
Excellent. Thank you for those answers.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Following on from some of those questions, are we working now we probably have been, I'm just confirming, as a collaborative cluster with the region, because obviously some of the royal treatment was filmed in Oamaru, and was it that one in Oamaru? Yeah, I think so. But, so there's different areas being filmed, and of course a lot in Central Otago with certain films. Is that something we're working, rather than marketing ourselves as a film destination on a standalone, are we marketing ourselves as a region to come to? Is that?
That's correct, Councillor Houlihan. So we work very closely with Film Otago Southland. And again, it provides us an opportunity to market Film Dunedin as our own identity, but equally recognise that the region itself has a broad range of strengths in terms of, choices for filmmakers and producers, and the things that we can provide within the city are fantastic and strong in terms of our built heritage. Equally, we can draw on the natural landscape of Maniatoto or other parts of the region in terms of making the city and the region an attractive place for film production.
Talking about facilities, where are we at? Has anything further happened around looking at the development of that sound production area in just behind I can't remember the name of the street, but the big building that we went to look at?
Yes, we're just still coming towards the tail end of a business case on that, and we're looking forward to seeing that come back so we can sort of see what the options are within there, and that will be brought back to the committee or council once that's prepared.
On the business case, business model canvases, do you have any, are you sort of notified on what type of business ideas are being put forward, and then does ED come in and work with any that are quite significant, or it stays through startup?
Generally, we leave that with startup. So we've been really conscious to understand our role with startup and the expertise that they offer. We do meet with the staff, the chair, and our DCC representative on the trust probably every 4 to 6 weeks, And I know that the Startup Trust is looking forward to coming back and presenting to the committee regarding their year-end report, which will probably provide a lot more detail around that in terms of specific nature of businesses that are coming through. There are plenty of exciting hero stories, the report back, I'm sure, will be very positive.
Great. And so do you know if there's any, you're certainly aware of any really good ideas? Obviously, all of them they'll think are good ideas, but anything that stands out?
Oh, look, there's certainly been some great hero stories coming through, certainly over the last 12 months. I just want to touch on, for instance, without picking names, I'm about to pick a name, of course. For instance, Winely has been, incredibly successful. So there is plenty of, examples of that, Cafe Logic and Saha. But what we are seeing in terms of, I suppose, trends coming through is that food and beverage is still remaining quite high, which in itself is really exciting with the relationship with the university and the Polytechnic. There's still a high degree of work around tech and software as a service coming through again as well. So it's a mixture, but there are some trends in terms of, I suppose, the tech and the food and beverage coming through.
Thank you. Just following on from the Great Dunedin Brainstorm, there was the group that it got recognised. There was a couple that was sort of acknowledged as that their ideas were going to be followed through and there was going to be some more work done on them, but we haven't heard anything further on that. Do you know what's happened with that? We had the women who were doing the building, and then I think there was a group who were doing some filming as well, so which of course ties in with some of our the film things that are happening now. Where are we at with that? Because ED was working with them and helping them with their plans.
But Mr. Deeker is still maintaining the relationship with the certainly the team that was looking at film options. That's both from a Film Otago Southland point of view, but also from a city point of view. So those relationships are still being maintained. The construction, women in construction activities, that was more, we believe that there was an opportunity to perhaps link that back to entities such as Dunedin Workforce Central and other sort of more mainstream activities that were occurring within the city as well.
And where is that at with that?
That's with a conversation with those two entities. So,
all right, thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Just one more question I forgot. Looking at point 2, Startup Dunedin Trust, and looking at the number of people who are inquiring both in Startup Fundamentals tertiary program and incubation services, are we tracking how that whole ecosystem is growing? And I just wanted commentary on, when you think a number of years ago of the number of people who came to these, are you seeing a big increase in the numbers of people who are coming to startup for support and mentoring and follow through?
Certainly Ms. Butler's probably will be better placed to actually sort of comment on the tracking that's coming through. In terms of the ecosystem though, the Startup Dunedin Trust has been doing quite a bit of work in terms of mapping the ecosystem, which is very exciting. They actually, ironically, they're producing maps of who is in the system and what services they can actually provide a founder that was potentially looking to establish. So there's a range of things in there, both in terms of services which are provided by Startup Dunedin, such as Audacious or incubation, but equally it also provides visibility over other members of the startup ecosystem, such as senior entrepreneurs or mainland investment angels, Kumar and so on. So it's in terms of mapping the ecosystem, there's some really exciting work that's happening there to help founders hopefully make things easier in terms of actually starting and creating businesses.
Oh, thank you for that. It sounds exciting.
Councillor Houlihan, you still have a question, or have you just left your hand up? All right, councillors, it looks like we have finished question time. So I'm happy to move that the committee notes the update report on the Dunedin economic development activities. seconded Councillor Elder. All those, or any discussion? Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Councillor Staines. I just wanted to comment that despite that first satisfaction matter, where it would seem that people are not satisfied or don't perceive that they're satisfied with council support. In fact, the report reads very positively, and when we think of the next report we're coming to, which mentions high value industries, I need to mention and note the contribution that code is making and the progress in that area. The contribution that film is making, which is likely to, as we always knew and was predicted into the future, will make an even greater contribution. And that in times of challenge, that startup is the Startup Trust is doing some great work and some great ideas come through in difficult times. In terms of study, I read it was actually a reference around somebody involved with conference Zooming with Thai education students and education providers. And I was heartened, and I was harking back to several years ago when we received a delegation from Thailand for Study Dunedin. And I am reminded that this is the long game. It's a long-term view, and the work we have done in the past, that Enterprise Dunedin has done in the past, will continue to pay off, even though we've had this interruption to it. So I have confidence in that, and I have confidence in our readiness for the return of visitors. What our view of cruise will be is another matter, and I'm sure that we will have a discussion on that at some point. But in terms of looking, being ready, prepared for the return of visitors, I feel that we are poised and ready for that. So thank you for the report. I think there's plenty of good news in it, and I believe that the city is poised, ready for the post-COVID era and through it as well. Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Given our profile through a Netflix movie and all that has brought, and Power of the Dog, etc., I believe Dunedin post-COVID will be a very attractive offering worldwide. And in fact, our destination marketing images won a deserved mention in destination marketing. So I'm looking forward to hearing what that plan is in the next few meetings, and also Study Dunedin. But I see that there is already a lot of work being done, and indeed we have got a welcoming package out for domestic students and their parents, which are a really significant contributor to the city. Looking at Startup Dunedin Trust and looking at the number of people who are being supported, but also excited about the mapping of that, because in fact you can have a good idea, but you need to get it funded. So that bigger ecosystem, I'll be really looking forward to that report from the Startup Trust, and we're just privileged to have code and the work that's being done in that space. So there's a lot of work still to be done on the destination plan, and looking at how we help Dunedin recover and how we support our businesses and our tourism industry through the Omnicom period, which there will be lots and lots of staff shortages, etc., and that citywide support that needs to happen with Business South and others, which we are in contact with, is really going to be critical at this time.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I just want to acknowledge the work by Malcolm Anderson and Dougal McGowan, who have since left Economic Development, and thank them for their energies and passion for the organisation during their employment at the DCC. Malcolm has done a lot of work around the destination plan, and I was sorry to see him go before it was finished. But moving on to other interests, and Dougal was a very good, had a very good impact through his term at DCC before moving on to Football South. So still in the town and available to us at times. But no, I just want to thank those two for contributing to over the last 12 months, especially as part of this report for noting.
Councillor Houlihan.
Yes, I want to agree. I think, you know, council was very lucky to get Dougal. He was a real asset, and he is an asset to the city. I'm pleased he's staying in Dunedin. And so I think it was a loss that we haven't got him anymore with us. But I also agree around the work that Malcolm did, because I think he was quite instrumental, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Christie, but in Plan D. And, you know, really that was so innovative, that plan. From a marketing point of view, I thought it was brilliant. And it competed with, you know, the likes of Saatchi and Saatchi. I thought it was excellent. So well done, Malcolm, for your input in that.
Any other speakers? If not, I'll put it. All those in favour? Against? That is carried. That brings us on to item 8, Stamp Investment Plan Update. Welcome.
Thank you.
Is there anything you wish to address before the questions?
Just happy to take questions. Thank you.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a few questions about some of the projects. Just overall, I wasn't aware of the 10 new projects, and I just wonder how they were arrived at. Was the money from government aimed at specific projects, or were they just generally hinted at?
So some of the funding was actually to continue on with destination plan fallout. So there are certain ones that are relating to that. Others, I believe, were with consultation with the industry once again. Yeah.
My next question is just about the wellbeing initiatives, because it says that it's scheduled for winter 2022, and I'm exceedingly concerned about the well-being of the tourism industry, and I think we've got some stats coming up about the terrible GDP and employment figures, etc. And I know from the people that I know about the stresses that are hitting the business owners that work in tourism, etc. And it says in the paragraph where any need is identified. So the need is identified, and I wonder if there's the ability to fast track those wellbeing initiatives in summer.
So when that was put in there, saying the need is identified, there's quite a few other organisations apparently delivering some of these programs. So we need to just identify what's not being delivered and then deliver on that. We are also looking at some forward-thinking initiative that we can actually engage them with looking forward. So it's still we are reviewing just what that need is and where we can provide something that's not actually already being provided out there.
If I could just add to Councillor, that we've got MB have been very supportive of changes that we might want to make to our program of work and also the timing. So you'll note in this report that we've had some extensions already to the timeframes for allowing us to be able to take a little bit longer to deliver some of these projects. And of course, with the new red light setting and other restrictions we've got, that may extend further again. So we are in constant discussion with MB about moving some of those projects time-wise, and also reassessing what needs might be at any particular point in time. So we're listening and responding as quickly as we can to the market. So we're not beholden to a calendar timeframe if it needs to be done.
Yeah, my concern was at one stage, a central government had given money to some areas, e.g. Queenstown, Rotorua, I think, and left Dunedin off the track when I knew that a lot of businesses and people were suffering. My next question is just around the crisis resilience planning. What's that, paragraph 20 on page 33, given the Omicron approach and being concerned, I guess, about tourism operations readiness for crises. Once these workshops were held, how many of the tourism businesses actually made themselves new crisis resilience plans and are ready to face the ongoing and continuing crises, it seems?
I'm sorry, Councillor, I don't have that information right on my hands because I wasn't actually overseeing that at the time. Some did actually have their plans in place and reviewed them, and some actually rewrote new ones, but I don't have the numbers for you. I'll have to come back on that, Councillor.
Is there still information available somewhere to help the businesses that may have missed out on this program? Because I wasn't entirely aware of it. I don't know if it happened at a time when I wasn't paying attention, and I just wonder whether there's something online. I love a good template to help businesses make their crisis resilience plans.
I believe there is, but once again, Councillor, I'd have to check that for sure.
Wildlife capital of New Zealand, I hear the seagulls in the background. Go Black Bulls. My next question is just around the pathways to carbon neutrality, and I'm aware that there was, I mean, it's fantastic to see the visitor industry looking at this, because obviously there's a lot of carbon issues around this. So there was I know there was a carbon champions breakfast back in October, and I'm just wondering where this work's sitting going forward, given that it's of extreme importance both to tourism and both to Dunedin's carbon zero goals.
So operators were given the opportunity to buy into the plan and have their plans done, and then come back with a rebate system to assist them with that. That's due for completion by the end of March. So there will be an update on where that's at. People are working on that at the moment. There's a wee bit of reluctance when there's no business happening in the sector. There's a little bit of resistance to engage fully in that.
Yeah, I think one of the barriers
associated.
One of the barriers was cost, and I mean, tourism operators have minimal income at the moment. So part of the concern was, I guess, about how that program was structured. So it would be great if that could be re-looked at to make it more palatable. That's my concern, is that people are not going to take it up. It's a great program, but I wonder if that one's being re-looked at again.
We can certainly do that.
Yeah, I think those were all of my questions for now. Thank you.
Councillor Laufiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair, tēnā kōrua, Mr. Christie and Ms. van der Vliet. My first question relates to point 6 about iwi initiatives. What's the time frame for that project, and do you envisage contracting or employing mana whenua to do this engagement on our behalf?
So that project, we're waiting on, a lot of this will depend on the outcome of the DDP, with them being consulted for that as well. And then there's the opportunity there to have somebody do it on our behalf, or to actually target in on specific projects that might come out of it as well, and areas that need addressing, and bring in experts to address certain areas that may be identified. So we're just waiting on the DDP results to then progress that to the next stage and decide on what approach will be the best to fit their needs.
If I can just add to Councillor, we've got a steering group for the development of the Dunedin Destination Plan, and that includes 2 local Runaka representatives. So we'd be looking to fully engage with Runaka around what any program of work might look like.
Thank you. And my second and final question relates to following up on Councillor Barker's pathways to carbon neutrality. So when people were reluctant to engage because of the cost, perhaps, how many operators did actually engage, and is there a possibility of extending this to the wider community?
We can certainly get you the numbers. The STAT funding is very directly targeted to tourism. So we could potentially have the conversation with the contractors about how they might want to undertake a wider engagement with the community, but it wouldn't be able to be funded through the STEP funding.
Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at point 18 and the product review, and I'm just wondering what the timeline on that is, given the straitened circumstances we're in. Just wanting to know where that's at, really.
Yeah, so I've spoken to the consultants in the last week, and they've assured us that the draft of the review will be completed by the end of March, and that we'll have that available for discussion with stakeholders, and we'll be making that available as soon as it's finalised as a document.
So they've had some of the meetings already around the gap analysis and looking at all the data around the region as well as Dunedin.
That's correct, Councillor. There's been quite a lot of work undertaken over the Christmas break with a team of people coming into the city and holding one-to-one meetings and workshops. That is what's now being currently entered into their plan for us in terms of the report, and they will be coming back with their recommendations and a framework, as I say, by the end of March.
Thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Oh, thank you. I'll shut off if my dog starts barking. He was getting a bit excited before. On page 34, under industry capability and product development, is that where we've got the headlines for digital support, digital content, and those, is that around planning now for international markets? Is that what that is looking at?
Yeah, that's correct, Councillor. A number of those projects will see us looking to rebuild capability, get marketing out into the market. So the MB funding is directed at ensuring that we can re-attract visitors to our location.
And I wondered with that, how have we started to, it says our targeted campaign, where are we targeting this? Like, are we, because obviously the whole of the world is too general, are we targeting Australia, or are we targeting Europe and Australia, or South America? You know, have we got particular areas we're looking at?
Look, we certainly have. We've got quite a lot of research that we know about from having conducted that over the last 12 to 18 months. That research will inform the markets that we target, both domestically and in Australia and wider internationally. We are working currently, we've got a tender which will be out of market for a new campaign that will be specifically looking at how we will attract people to the city. And we'll be using a lot of digital channels. That is the way that is the most cost effective for us to be able to reach those target markets. So, you know, a lot of Facebook, a lot of direct advertising where we know we can get in front of the right audiences and to the decision makers that are the ones that look to book travel. So as I said earlier, we think there'll be a big market initially around the visiting friends and family, but then we'll start looking also at other markets that we know that'll be coming on stream, cooperating and working in, of course, with Tourism New Zealand and our regional partners. So, you know, they all have a role to play in different ways in the coming months as to what we'll be doing in those international markets.
So sorry, I might have missed it, but I don't think you said specifically who we're targeting, i.e. Australia or Australia and other places.
Look, specifically, we're still, domestic travel was 65% of our visitor market pre-COVID, so it's still a very important market for us. Australia was the next biggest market, so we're obviously looking at Australia, but internationally we'll be working with Tourism New Zealand around those countries that they know have got, they've gone through the dream phase, so they're ready to look at booking. And of course, it's going to be somewhat dependent on the logistics of being able to get flights and people moving to come to visit New Zealand. So we'll be working in with all of the major airlines and our inbound operators that are that are booking those trade tours, which is where we think we'll be getting that initial interest. So still a lot of planning to be done, but the main markets will be domestic and Australia.
Brilliant. So given we're going to be focusing on digital, can you say what we're looking for our ROI and our CRO? So like for our return on our investment and our conversion rate optimization. So like what is success for us with a CRO? What do we want them to come through those funnels and actually do, you know, like book an accommodation or book a flight, or what will be our, you know, our end goal there?
Yeah, well, look, obviously we're trying to get those metrics that we can measure to see what the conversion rates are. Different channels are easier to do than others. So there's a lot of the marketing that we do where we can't see the conversion because people will book directly to a particular operator. But where we can track it, we are obviously very interested in gathering that data. We have a staff member that we have got some funding through STAP for that is enabling us to break down the analytics and show the effects that we're getting from the various campaigns. So they're not just finger in the air stuff, they have got a science around them, and we are measuring that and happy to provide you with that data at any time, Councillor.
And for the SOE, like I assume you've got someone who's going to be doing some keyword indicators and getting it higher up in searches around Dunedin. Are you? Is that what we've got someone working on the search engine optimization?
Yes, absolutely. And we've got a review constantly underway with our website to see how we can improve that. And that's an ongoing piece of work. But we've got a substantial piece of work at the moment looking at just refreshing the content in our website, and that will certainly feature making sure we've got the key words that will be used for the SOE stuff.
Have we got any plans? Because I certainly know when I was doing a lot of digital previously, like videos really do attract a lot of attention, and we could even start those sooner rather than later because people will be looking now to book, you know, there's a long time frame for overseas bookings. But, you know, are we planning to do any sort of short videos around our businesses and tourism operators and things like that on the website? Because your website is obviously your biggest tool.
Yeah, look, we are doing that currently, Councillor, and we're intending to do more. We've got good in-house resource in our team, and the digital content is definitely very attractive. You'll see it on a number of our platforms. I know several councillors do repost a lot of our work, which is appreciated because it does help us to reach bigger audiences. So please continue to do that. We'll keep creating the content if people find it helpful. And yeah, we're always looking at putting more. Our website will contain more, but it's mostly through the social media activity that we generate the interest.
So are you in communication with Dunedin, mainly obviously tourism businesses and businesses in general that might benefit from this, that could participate? Has that conversation started yet, or?
Yeah, look, we certainly are across all sectors, Councillor, and we'd like to start profiling some of our other sectors. So, you know, obviously code is something that we're keen to make sure that the story is well told in a digital format. We've got other sectors that we've got some interest in also ensuring that we put up on these platforms. But visit is a real focus for us ultimately as well. So we just have to get that balance right in the content creation.
Thank you.
We seem to run towards the end of questions, so would someone like to move? Moved Councillor Barker, seconded Councillor Gary. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I think Mr. Christie talked about dreaming, and maybe they're dreaming of the royal treatment, it seems, from where Netflix is at. And I certainly take on board, I think it was Councillor Elder that talked about actually measuring the amount of hits, etc., through Google Analytics or something about, you know, it ends up on TV and how many people are searching for it. And I think those would be quite exciting statistics. 23 projects is a huge amount for Enterprise Dunedin to manage, and there's a lot of challenges there. I think I'm really excited about seeing the destination plan, because I think that's the key that will unlock a lot of where we're going in the future. And I think product development work as well. Some of our product gets a little, we've done things the same way for a long time. And I talked with the team that were doing the product review, must have been last week, and I was extremely impressed by them and the quality and the caliber of the people involved. And I'm really excited about that. It's really great to see central government investing in tourism. It's been one of the hardest hit areas, and they've put $1.7 million into Enterprise Dunedin, and also the $2.5 million that they put into the STEP funding into 5 of our key attractions. Try not to name them off the top of my head because I may miss one out and they might get upset. And there's also been a lot more central government money into wage support. We can see from the report that's just coming up from Infometrics that the tourism industry has been devastated, and that's why I really appreciate seeing all this the STEP work and the work that Enterprise Dunedin are putting in. Dunedin's GDP, and this is just to the end of March 21, for tourism is down 40%. Now that's a devastating blow. The employment's down 25%. And a lot of those people will have shifted out of the industry because they have wonderful transferable skills, but it still is a loss that will take a long time for people to get back. There's been at least 500 jobs lost in the sector. We can tell it from the Infometrics report coming out, and the challenges continue with Omicron looming, etc. And that's why I was asking about some of the crisis resilience plans. I think that, you know, when you're hanging off the edge of the cliff by the skin of your teeth, having to deal with stuff like, I'm afraid, carbon zero, crisis resilience and planning is sometimes just really hard for some of those businesses. So we all need to show them some love. I appreciate seeing some of the councillors who've been out and taken photographs of attractions that they've been to, and as Mr. Christie says, sharing some of the posts, because we all need to do our together. We all know that tourism adds all the export dollars and vitality to our city. It enables our arts and events to flourish, our heritage buildings to be restored, and it has also a huge effect on our ability to look after our ecosystem and conservation. When we look at things like Orokonui, the Albatross Centre, Penguin Place, which government gave them more money as well. So this is great to see the support that's coming in from government to keep these good things going. A lot of people might perceive tourism as people coming in and going to these rich paid attractions, etc. But actually it's so important for the fabric of what's going on in our city, for our heritage and wildlife. So we can't underestimate that. It also employs my child. My daughter is a waitress who's working her way through university. So it's creating those employment pathways for young people as well. It's really vital that the STEP projects are worked on urgently so that we're fit for the future one day. Apparently October, those borders will open, if not before then, and we will need to be fighting fit and reinvented in a lot of ways for making Dunedin shine on the world stage. So I look forward to the progression of these STEP projects and look forward to the Dunedin destination plan as well. Thank you.
There appears to be no other speakers, so there won't be a right of reply because only Councillor Barker has spoken. So I'll put it, all those in favour, against, that is carried. That moves us on to the Dunedin City Annual Economic Profile March 2021 update. Mr. Christie.
I'd just like to note, councillors, that you'll be aware that this report does have a time lag. The reason we produce this report is it does give an accurate marker in time at around that 31 March period each year. We're very conscious of the fact that the data is somewhat out of date by the time it gets to us because of the way that it is all calculated. We can't get that any quicker. This is actually quicker than you'd normally get it. But we do have Mr. Patterson who obviously lives and breathes this economic information and will be able to answer some of the more specific questions that you might have around, so where to from 31st of March till now. with the various different data sets that he has available to him. So I'm happy to take questions on the report, but really do look to the expertise that Mr. Patterson will bring to the conversation.
Councillor Lafiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. Tēnā koe, Mr. Patterson. I've just got a question about mean annual earnings, page 8, point 8, page 40. And I know it's very pedantic, and I've tried to do some research myself, but can you just explain, please, why we use mean rather than average? And then I've got a follow-up question. In terms of mean annual earnings.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lafiso. So the main reason we're using mean earnings, so it's a type of average, is because of data availability. There are other ways that we could look at incomes. We could use medians, or we could look at stratifying it into different income bands. But unfortunately, that stratification is only really available each census. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And my first question was related to, and my second question is, final question is too, is often we talk around the table about our most vulnerable individuals and community, whānau. So I'm just looking at the increase in the above target results. That's a fantastic result in terms of earnings, given that it's 59,000 rather than 53. But what would it take if we were to try and track changes, if any, in the earnings of our lowest earners?
So to really comprehensively track their earnings, we will probably have to wait until the next census to see across all income, across all demographic groupings. But what I can say, and this is not their earnings, but it is their employment opportunities. We do have some access to some payroll statistics, which isn't good enough to follow the earnings of each demographic group, but it does give us an idea of the number of people employed to a demographic level of detail. And we saw that early on in the pandemic, job losses were concentrated on youth predominantly, if we're thinking about it from an age breakdown. And quite pleasingly, over the 6 months since March, we've seen that youth employment has picked up quite strongly. We can also see, when we look through some of the MSD data on people that are receiving job seeker support, we can see that job seeker numbers, while they're higher than pre-pandemic, they have begun to come down across all different age groups. And it's a little hard to completely put our finger on the trends for different ethnicities, but they certainly haven't gone up. And there is some evidence that Māori job seekers looks to be coming back down again as well in the local area.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I recognise that we've got some new updated statistics from Infometrics that are on the website. First of all, I'd like to ask that as part of our reports that we get those like on the first page, there's all of the top line stuff, and I think that would be really useful to see quarterly as an update, because we're getting this stuff that's March 21. But when we look at the GDP figures in March 21, it was negative 1.0 for Dunedin and negative 1.2 for New Zealand. But Mr. Patterson, we had much better news for September, didn't we? Ending September 2021. Do you know those off the top of your head, or shall I say them?
I've got another eye looking right at another screen that you can say it.
Oh, because those looked a little bit dire, but I just, would you agree that the GDP growth for New Zealand for the annual period to September was 3.7%, but Dunedin was 4.3%.
Yes, I would agree. According to the Infometrics September 21 quarterly report for Dunedin. So what we saw in the annual economic profile that we presented, it provides much deeper analysis to an industry level of detail, so we can see specifically what's happening within each part of the economy. The quarterly monitor is something that gives us a more up-to-date snapshot of what's occurring at a very high level. And it has shown that since March, across a number of indicators, they bottomed out after a year of pandemic, and many have begun to creep higher from that bottom position.
But we have no actual detail on why that was, which parts of the I guess economy were those ones that were leaping ahead and affecting those statistics so much, especially for Dunedin being above the national average.
It's hard to 100% put our finger on it, but from what I have seen in analysis of some partial payroll statistics, so it doesn't capture all earnings from business owners and self-employed people, but it does give us a partial snapshot of employment. It's shown that we've continued to have very strong growth in public sector employment, in healthcare, in construction. It also, there does seem to be some evidence that manufacturing has begun to stabilise, and quite pleasingly, professional services employment, which captures a whole range of things from accountants and lawyers to people working in IT and engineering related jobs. That's risen quite a bit over the year to December, actually.
So my next question is, when might we expect the quarter ending December to be available?
I don't have a date, councillor, but we can note the interest that councillors have in the quarterly updates, and when we receive it, we'll send that to you directly.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's also good for the public to see, because obviously I know it's in there, so I can burrow through the website and find it. But for the public's information, I guess that would be coming forward in a publicly accessed report. That would be great. Thank you.
There doesn't appear to be any more questions. I apologise for the wildlife noise. We've got a black-backed gull and its youngster who are trying to break into our meeting. They're banging on the window. So is there any other questions? Councillor Elder.
Obviously, your meeting is very, very important. And I was just a little query, actually, and that is point 11. While expenditure in hospitality has declined, employment in accommodation and food sector services has held up. And I thought that was a really interesting comment, and I was just wondering if we could find out why what they think the issue, well, why it's held up, basically. Is it because more local people went out? I don't know.
Yeah. I think that comment was referring since March 21. So there has been somewhat of an increase in employment since March 21 within accommodation food services specifically. What we did see in that sector when we looked through card spending statistics was before the I guess before the border closure with Auckland, we were seeing reasonable levels of hospitality expenditure. It's not only something that derives activity from visit, but it also derives activity from Dunedin residents. So it could well have been more Dunedin residents getting out and about. When we looked at data that was considering spending between the inner city and other parts of Dunedin, it seemed that spending on hospitality was holding up particularly well outside of the CBD area, so in suburban areas.
And on page 76, we're looking at how do house prices in Dunedin City compare. There seems to be a little bit of a flattening off indicated in that compared to the rest of New Zealand. Has that trend continued, or what's the story there?
I'm sorry, I don't actually have the most recent statistics on me, and that'll be something that we get our hands on when we receive stuff up to December in the quarterly monitor.
Okay, thank you. And just when it comes to, however, housing affordability, we're still seeming to be on the same curve as the rest of New Zealand. Is that right?
Sorry, excuse me. I don't have that that chart directly in front of me.
Oh, sorry. Page 77.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it now. So according to this, we were at a relatively similar level to New Zealand compared with our incomes. So even though house prices at that point in time were still below the national average, incomes nationally are pushed up quite high by the higher earnings in Auckland and Wellington.
Thank you.
Mayor Hawkins.
Kia ora, Mr. Chairman. Kia ora, Mr. Patterson. Just a few questions, mostly around methodology, but because it's been raised in questions that these results are dire to the year end March 21. Infometrics is both an analysis firm and a forecasting firm. So if on the 1st of April 2020 were you to be forecasting where we would have ended up by the end of that financial year, would you have anticipated it to have been worse, better off or worse off than where we ended at that financial year?
Thank you, Mayor Hawkins. So I couldn't speak for what Infometrics would have thought at that stage, but from my own experience, this certainly would be a better result than I would have anticipated when we first went into the pandemic, for a couple of reasons that I would single out. Well, probably there'd be more, but we don't have all day. One is the support that businesses and employees received in terms of wage subsidies and other forms of assistance. The other being that our economy was able to operate, notwithstanding the tourism sector, but most other parts were able to operate quite freely. But the other thing, and this is probably where a lot of economic conjecture fell flat, that's because it underestimated the resilience and adaptability of people to change their behaviour, to make good decisions in a completely new operating environment. And that's something that's come through, and not just in Dunedin, but in many other parts of New Zealand as well.
Yeah, thanks. In the report, it speaks to a spectrum of what the report calls skilled workers, which in my view is a form of intellectual snobbery, and certainly service and hospitality jobs are 100% skills, and there is no such thing as a non-skilled worker. And I appreciate that that definition is being lifted from somewhere else. But would there be any downside to us in our reporting reframing that, everywhere else people are listed by profession without value judgments attached to the work, and this seems to stand out in that regard?
I think that's an important point that's raised, and it is something where there is increasing awareness to not simply characterize low skilled as being about the skill level of the person, but sometimes it's used more to describe the tasks that are required within the role. The language, though, certainly could evolve in that space.
Yeah, thanks. I've only got two more. One is around the relationship between mean income and mean housing prices. And I accept the earlier point that median data is more problematic from an income point of view, and you're better off using the same comparison on both, or the same measurement on both sides of the ledger. But this appears to be mean individual income. And so is the assumption in that housing affordability ratio that they're all single income households. Do you get what I mean? Because I don't know too many single income households that are buying property. So chances are, as opposed to using, say, mean household income, which is differently problematic, but it's still another option.
Yeah, there are many different ways to look at housing affordability, and I would agree that it's much better to look at realistic circumstances, so what income the entire household brings in. The reason why I believe that Infometrics only reports relative to individual earnings is because of the availability of good household earnings data each year. Perhaps a better way to think of it rather than housing affordability would be what's the relative price of income of housing compared to the typical income that you could go and find in the local area. But it doesn't take into consideration all circumstances like how big your families are, how many people are able to participate in the labour market, what your underlying level of capital is like, how much money you had before you got into housing, so what your loan is like. It's
or in Dunedin, where you have tens of thousands of residents who aren't working full-time by definition, being here as undergraduates, which makes mean household income problematic for us for different reasons. And my last question really is around, and it's useful to have the comparisons between what's happening in Dunedin relative to the national average, or national benchmarks, or whatever. Is it possible from the data that's readily available to be able to draw comparisons with comparable metropolitan centres, either instead of or as well as, areas that might have similar, agriculture's held up remarkably well, for example, but that's less of a factor for most metropolitan centres. And tourism is obviously a bigger deal in most metropolitan centres, and trying to get and it isn't, just a sense of how easily available those sorts of comparisons would be.
I could certainly look at that for you. That shouldn't be too much of a problem.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillors, any further questions? If not, I'll move that we note the Dunedin City Annual Economic Profile March 2021 update. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Fesso. Is there any discussion? If not, I'll put it. All those in favour? Against? That is carried. That brings us to our last item on the agenda, items for consideration by the chair. Is there any items for consideration? If not, I will declare the meeting closed. Paul, can you take us offline?